Good morning. I'm Mike Ermey. Today's message will be from the book of Luke, chapter 24, verses 13 through 34. I'll be reading from the New Living Translation Bible. That same day, two of Jesus' followers were walking to the village of Emmaus, 7 miles from Jerusalem. As they walked along, they were talking about everything that had happened. As they talked and discussed these things, Jesus himself suddenly came and began walking with them, but God kept them from recognizing him. He asked them, "What are you discussing so intently as you walk along?" They stopped short, sadness written across their faces. Then one of them, Cleopas, replied, "You must be the only person in Jerusalem who hasn't heard about all the things that have happened the last few days." "What things?" Jesus asked. "The things that happened to Jesus, the man from Nazareth," they said. "He was a prophet who did powerful miracles, and he was a mighty teacher in the eyes of God and all the people. But our leading priests and other religious leaders handed him over to be condemned to death, and they crucified him. We had hoped that he was the Messiah who had come to rescue Israel. This all happened 3 days ago. Then some women from our group of his followers were at his tomb early this morning, and they came back with an amazing report. They said his body was missing, and they had seen angels who told them that Jesus is alive. Some of our men ran out to see, and sure enough, his body was gone, just as the women had said." Then Jesus said to them, "You foolish people, you find it so hard to believe all that the prophets wrote in the scriptures. Wasn't it clearly predicted that the Messiah would have to suffer all these things before entering into his glory?" Then Jesus took them through the writings of Moses and all the prophets, explaining from all the scriptures the things concerning himself. By this time they were nearing Emmaus and the end of their journey. Jesus acted as if he was going on, but they begged him, "Stay with us, since it's getting late." So he went home with them. As they sat down to eat, he took the bread and blessed it. Then he broke it and gave it to them. Suddenly their eyes were opened and they recognized him, and at that moment he disappeared. They said to each other, "Didn't our hearts burn within us as he talked with us on the road and explained the scriptures to us?" And within the hour they were on their way back to Jerusalem. They found the 11 disciples and the others who had gathered with them, who said, "The Lord really has risen. He appeared to Peter."
Thank you, Pastor Ermey, for bringing our text today. And welcome to all of you online. I guess I can say welcome to all of our campuses. We're a multi-site church now. I feel like we kind of are, because some of the first churches that started were out of people's homes. So in some ways, we've got a 50 plus site multi-church going on. So I just want to welcome all of you here to our online worship experience. To introduce myself, I am Joe Brannon. I am a beloved child of God First who happens to be the lead pastor here at Crosswalk Community Church, and like what CJ said, soon to be GC Surrey Hills. We're happy to have you all here today. So last week, we started a new series called Believe. And it's based on the passage John 20 verses 31. And it says, "But these are written so that you may continue to believe that Jesus is the Messiah, the Son of God, and that by believing in him, you will have life by the power of his name." And so we're discovering, as we believe in Jesus, we find life. Last week, we talked about the starting point to believe is Jesus. And we told the story of Jesus showing up to the disciples locked in the room after his death-defying miracle. And then Jesus telling Thomas to believe. And we talked about how the depth of somebody's belief is based off of the depth of their trust. And depth of trust is based off the depth of relationship. And Jesus already has that relationship with us. Jesus is right here in the room with you. Jesus tells you to believe. He says, when I say believe, that means you can trust in me. Don't focus on the troubles out there. Jesus is right here in the room with you. Believe in me and the life I have for you, because he has life for you. So we're going to be continuing this week in our series, Believe. And the title of this week's message is Adventure in Believing. So I want to ask you a question. Have you ever done ride sharing before? A taxi, Uber, Lyft, etc. And I don't know about you, but what I will do is I will pull out my phone when I get into the car and I'll actually put in the address that I'm going to and use the GPS. Now, I do that for safety, but more so, I've had too many big adventures with ride sharing. My wife can definitely attest to that. Attest, right? Yeah, attest to that. Because there was one instance with her and I, it was a pretty interesting ride, but that's not the adventure that I want to talk about. And I like a good adventure. That's in my nature. It kind of gets my juices going. It's exciting, and it kind of gets my adrenaline going a little bit. But there's one memorable adventure that happened in Mexico City, and it was definitely an adventure. I was able to go on a work trip to tell a story about one of our churches down in Mexico City. And I worked the first part of our trip, and then the last part, I got to hang out with two of my best friends, Grant and Kurt. And it was a great trip. And I'll tell you what, Mexico City, if you look on the map, it's not a resort. It's not a resort type of place. It's not what you think about when you go to these resorts and it's all inclusive and everything. Mexico City is down in the heart of Mexico. It's the capital of Mexico. And it's a completely different world down there. Very, very, very different. There's the traffic. The traffic is ridiculous. You can name any place in the United States where there's a lot of traffic. New York, Dallas, LA, I don't care. Mexico City has every single place in the United States beat. The lines, those are just suggestions, okay? People just drive wherever they want to. There's police everywhere. The food is absolutely amazing. And we got advice from a lot of people where to visit and how to be cautious. And some of our friends that live there or have visited several times also, they would give us advice in how to be cautious, places to eat. The main thing, be careful with the food. The food is really good, but when everybody says don't drink the water, literally, don't drink the water. Or one piece of advice that we got is don't eat food rinsed with water, which you don't think about that. So we had to be really cautious. But there's one particular adventure that really stands out. Now, I'm not sure if you have been in an unknown territory before, but I want to ask you, have you been in an unknown territory We're talking about it's an unknown territory already in a territory that's unknown to you, okay? I learned to not trust Uber drivers or Lyft drivers there in Mexico City. You see, almost every time when we would get dropped off, at the wrong place. Most of the time, it was pretty close. Now, there's this one time where I am heading to the church that the pastor is at, and we're going to film this story. And I take this Uber, and I get dropped off, and I have the GPS. Well, down in Mexico City, I'm in international territory, so the GPS didn't work very well. And so when I was watching, it would get really confused and they're taking their own shortcuts and everything else, but I'm paying attention, making sure we're going the same direction. He stops and I see it and I'm like, okay, it looks like I'm right here next to it. So I get out, I get all of my gear out, and he drives off. I rate him, I give him a tip and everything. And then I look down and my GPS finally kind of recalibrates or something. It kind of reroutes and it's showing me completely off the path. And I'm thinking, are you kidding me? Are you kidding me right now? And so I am looking at the GPS and I'm walking through the streets of Mexico City. And what we were told is to not be obvious when you're walking in the streets when you have GPS because you will look like a tourist. And so you just got to be really cautious because people will start coming up to you and they'll start messing with you. Some people, not everybody in Mexico City is that way, but that was some of the advice that we got. And it wasn't great service. So I'm walking through and I end up passing like this garage sale thing that's happening in the street. So people are selling stuff all in the street. The whole street's closed off and people are starting to give me some looks, really weird and everything. I'm carrying $10,000 worth of gear, okay, in this luggage looking thing. And I'm trying to look at my phone to make sure I'm going in the right direction. And I've got cameras in my backpack and I'm really concerned. I'm in an unknown territory, already in an unknown territory. And so the GPS was able to lead me every step of the way, and I made it just fine. Thank you, Lord. And during this adventure, I found it hard to believe and trust in the Uber and Lyft drivers. I couldn't trust them. Every time when we would go somewhere, me and my two best friends, we had a hard time trusting them because most of the time we got dropped off away from our actual destination. But we had some contacts down there. We had some friends who used to live in Mexico City and we could communicate to them. The pastor became a really good friend of mine and I was able to communicate with him. And we would ask them directions. And we would ask their advice. And I found that we could trust them. We could trust them when they gave the directions. We could trust them when they gave their advice and the directions. And it made our life in Mexico City so much better when we were able to trust somebody that was giving us directions. It was a great adventure. It was culturally rich experience. It was very memorable, and honestly, it was a beautiful place in its own way. The architecture there is just gorgeous, and the food is phenomenal. It really is. You got to be really cautious with it, but it is really, really good. So, jumping into our text this week, this text actually takes us backward in chronological order from what happened last week. Last week we had the disciples who were locked in the room. Jesus had already risen. It was Sunday evening. It was Easter evening. So this has actually taken us a little before that. Same day. All right. So we got two followers of Jesus. They're heading to a village called Emmaus, which is probably their home. So they were probably heading home. And of course, you got the discussion of the events that just occurred. It was breaking news. It was a big deal. And then Jesus shows up. Of course, they don't recognize him. And you wonder with the question that Jesus asks of, hey, what are you talking about? You wonder if Jesus is kind of messing with the two disciples there, maybe acting a little dumb, a little ignorant. And that would be really ridiculous for someone to ask a question like that because this was huge news that was going on at the time. Very similar to what's going on right now. A lot of our discussions and our conversations are based off of social distancing and being spatially aware and talking about COVID-19 and when are we going to open things up and how are we going to do it and those kinds of things. So if we're talking about that stuff and somebody walks up and be like, hey, what are you talking about? Like, are you kidding me? Do you live under a rock? Obviously, these two people had been following Jesus. They were followers of Christ. They knew a lot of details about it. And you got to remember how things were back then. Remember, Jesus was the king that was going to free them. He was going to free them. And they were saddened. There was a downcast when they were telling this story. So they experienced this. But they talked about this amazing report from the women. So they knew about the resurrection. So this is between the time when Jesus was resurrected and before Jesus showed up in the room. So they knew about the resurrection, yet when we read the text, they don't mention Jesus being alive. They mention that his body is missing. That his body is missing. They didn't believe in the resurrection. Think about that. They were told that Jesus was resurrected, and they didn't believe in it. They didn't believe that Jesus was alive. And then Jesus comes across kind of harsh. In verse 25 through 26, it says, "Then Jesus said to them, 'You foolish people, you find it so hard to believe all the prophets wrote in the scriptures. Wasn't it clearly predicted that the Messiah would have to suffer all these things before entering his glory?'" You see, these were Jewish people. They knew the scripture. They witnessed the fulfillment of the scripture. And they still didn't get it. They still didn't believe. And what's crazy is that they knew the scripture. They knew what needed to be fulfilled. It was laid out in the Old Testament for them of these things would occur and then this would happen. It was laid out for them. So they knew the end of the story. They knew the end of the story if they were just paying attention. But what's remarkable is that Jesus walks them through all the scriptures to help them connect the dots. He goes back to the prophets and he says, hey, this thing and this thing and this thing. See, this was all fulfilled to get to this point, saying that Jesus is alive. And if you notice, even when he did that, they still didn't recognize it was Jesus. They still didn't recognize. Until they experienced a familiar scene. It was like a deja vu. It was similar to the Last Supper when Jesus broke the bread and he shared it. And that had just happened 3 days prior. And then they thought, wait, I remember this. And then they believed. And they were pumped. They were excited. Because finally it dawned on them that, wait a minute, this is Jesus. I recognize this scene right here. This is Jesus. And they end up leaving that hour, which is the worst time of day to leave. Keep in mind, it was evening. It was evening. They convinced Jesus to stick around saying, hey, this is a bad time to keep traveling. Why don't you just stay the night with us? So they were so pumped and so excited that they encountered Jesus Christ that they left at the worst time to run back. They just couldn't help it. They had to share this good news with their friends, with the other 11 disciples. You see, following Jesus is an adventure. They believed in Jesus at first. We don't know how long these two particular disciples walked with Jesus. But we know the 11 walked with him for about 3.5 years. So they believed in Jesus. They believed he was king, and they were going to be part of this revolution that was going to occur, this freedom from oppression. And then their king dies, and all hope is lost. So they believe in Jesus, and then they lose all hope. Jesus comes back to life, and they're just saying, what now? And then they find out, well, his body's missing. So we're talking about salt in the wound. So now somebody stole his body. So there's a trust that is damaged. They trusted in Jesus, and there was trust that was lost. And they couldn't see the truth. They were blinded by the pain that they were encountering. Pain blinded the truth. Pain blinded them from seeing the truth, to see Jesus. And then they encountered Jesus. They recognized Jesus. And then what? Then they believe again. You want to talk about being fickle? I've got a confession. The original title of this message, it was actually going to be Believing is a Journey. Because I thought these two disciples, they're on a journey, and Jesus meets them on this journey. But then I looked up what journey meant. Journey is an act of traveling from one place to another. That implies that there's a destination. Adventure, the verb is engage in hazardous and exciting activity, especially the exploration of unknown territory. It's an adventure in believing. Believing and trusting in Jesus is unknown territory. And it can seem hazardous, but Jesus is with us in that adventure. And see, he walks alongside. In verse 15, brothers and sisters, I want you to hear this. Verse 15, it says, as they talked, talking about those two disciples, as they talked and discussed these things, their world is completely turned upside down right now. They don't know what to believe. They don't know what to trust in. They don't know where to go. As they talked and discussed these things, Jesus himself suddenly came and began walking with them. Believing in Jesus and the life we have in him is an adventure. It's not a destination that we arrive at some point. It will fluctuate. Our belief in Jesus and the life that he has for us, it's going to fluctuate. We're going to have highs. We're going to have lows, just like these disciples. They believed and they were all for it. And then they didn't know to believe. Their trust was hurt. They were like, we can't trust that Jesus guy. He's dead. And now his body is missing. And then they trust again. It's this fluctuation up and down. But what's remarkable, just like these two disciples, is that Jesus is walking with you every single step of the way. And he's also connecting the dots, just like he connected the dots for those disciples. He's pointing out all those times when he showed up. He's pointing out all those times when he said, your lack of faith, when you didn't believe at that point, I believed. I was there in that moment. Oh, in that moment right there, I was there too. Oh, and that pain right there, that heartbreak that happened there, I was there too. I never left you. And here's the real good news. Even in your lack of faith, even in your lack of trust and belief in Jesus, that doesn't change the fact that he believes in you. He believes in you. He loves you way too much to leave you where you are. Because we're on this journey of constantly believing in Jesus. And as we believe in Jesus, we start to see who he really is. And as we believe in Jesus, we start to see who we really are, because Jesus is constantly telling you who you really are. Your job, the thing that you do, or the thing that you did, maybe you lost your job, that doesn't define who you really are. Because it's not what you do that creates your identity, because Jesus Christ has already created your identity. And he says that you are a beloved child of God. You see, Jesus isn't up there somewhere waiting on your faith. He himself joins your adventure in believing in him. He says, you may not have faith and believe in me, but you know what? I'm going to walk with you. Because I believe in you, and the more that I believe in you, the more that you'll believe in me. And he's walking with you, and he's pointing out all those areas that he has been present. There is life in Jesus, brothers and sisters. Maybe you are struggling with believing Jesus right now, and that things will get better. Because we're wondering, will things really get better? Because there's a lot of talk of things starting to open up, but then you hear all this talk of when things start to open up and we can get close to one another again somewhat, we can go to a restaurant, we can meet back at churches and everything, and gyms, and get our hair done. When we hear about that, we also hear about this other side where they say that there's going to be a second wave if there's not caution. So maybe you're struggling with believing in Jesus that things are going to get better. Maybe you just want to go back to normal. Brothers and sisters, you are encountering the risen Jesus Christ right now. You are encountering him right now. He is walking with you right now while you are downcast, while you may be struggling with depression, while you may be struggling with that addiction that has grasped you for so many years, and then you found freedom in it, and then all of a sudden it's starting to grab a hold of you again because of this isolation. You're wanting control. You want to hold on to something because there's so many things out of your control right now. Or maybe you're experiencing this depression or this downness that you've never experienced before. Binge watching Netflix shows all day long. Feeling like you have no purpose. Because things seem so hopeless. Well, you're on an adventure right now. And maybe the very thing that you're going through is preparing you for something really special. Matter of fact, I just want to say that it is. The road that you're on now, that road to Emmaus, when you're downcast, when you're saddened, when you feel hopeless, wondering what's next. You had hope before all this stuff started happening. But my question is, what was your hope in? Maybe your hope was in something instead of someone. Your hope was in growing that business. Your hope was in, going on that trip in the summertime, getting that promotion, or just being able to live your normal life. And now you see this hopelessness. And now you're on this road wondering what's next. Well, guess what? Jesus is suddenly showing up. He is showing up in your life right now. If you're watching this, if you're listening to this, Jesus is showing up right now because I am telling you about the risen Jesus Christ. Because there is hope in Him. There's a future in Him. And He is walking with you. Whether you want Him to or not, He is still going to walk with you because He loves you too much to keep you where you are. And so, as God, as Jesus is preparing you for something special, as He's walking along this road with you, guess what? You're going to reach Emmaus. You're going to reach that spot where all of a sudden, you're going to say, whoa, I recognize this. This was Jesus. I see Jesus. Our hearts were burning during that COVID-19 time, during that time when it was so hopeless. There was something inside of me that just kept churning. But now I know it was Jesus speaking to me, talking to me, loving me, giving me hope. So right now, I ask you, brothers and sisters, you don't have to believe in yourself. You don't have to pull your bootstraps up to get through this. You can't fight your way through this. But what I do want to say is that you can believe in Jesus and look for Him. Because just like in that locked room, He's on this path with you. He's on this adventure with you. And what He's trying to do is give you the life that He has for you. Because He's got a special life for you. One that brings greater joy and peace and hope than any job, than any situation, than any house, than any car. I want to personally invite you to believe in Jesus. Because He is believing in you. And He loves you a lot. We're going to continue on with our worship. And at this point, if you just need to spend some time praying to Jesus, spend some time with Jesus. Do it. And just let the words soak in. Come to Him open-handed, open-hearted, open-minded. Say, Jesus, open my eyes. Help me to believe in you.